Hello everyone, I'm Rose, and let me share my story with you. My mother-in-law, Sherry, used to be a different person, not the vain and shallow woman she is now. This change occurred later in her life, or at least that's what my husband Dylan believes. Growing up, Dylan and Sherry didn't have a lavish lifestyle. They led a modest life together after Dylan's father passed away when he was just 4 years old. Sherry took on the role of the breadwinner, and they've lived a simple life until Dylan secured a great job after college. Dylan is a remarkable and kind man, not just because he's my husband. He earned a full scholarship to medical school and became a doctor. Despite his success, Dylan remained humble. However, Sherry's life took a turn for the luxurious. Now, let me clarify. I don't have a job for reasons I'll discuss later, but that doesn't mean I am poor or dependent on others. Unfortunately, Sherry got the wrong impression of me when we first met. Whether it was my clothes or mannerisms, something repelled her. On our first encounter, she said, "Dylan, is this the girl you've been raving about? She's so plain and average. Why would you choose someone like her? Does she even have a job?" My name is Rose, and no, I don't have a job. However, Sherry assumed that meant I was planning to trap her son and drain his money. She labeled me as a gold digger and a parasite, making baseless assumptions about my character. Dylan defended me, but the argument escalated and we decided to leave. During our journey home, Dylan apologized for his mother's behavior, acknowledging that she had crossed a line. He reassured me, saying his mom no longer knows how to act like a sane person. Although her words hurt, Dylan asked me not to mind them. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that being comfortable around Sherry might be a challenge. After all, she's the only parent Dylan has left. I decided to step back. We don't have much extended family, and completely cutting her off isn't feasible. I won't push you to be friends with her, but can you at least be civil around her? I can act respectfully towards your mom, Dylan, but I doubt she'll reciprocate. Don't worry, Rose. I'll keep her in check. If she crosses the line, we can consider reducing contact. I love my mom, but I love you too. I won't let her harass you for no reason. I was skeptical about my relationship with Sherry. Dylan assured me he'd stand up for me, but I still felt uneasy. Dylan and I got married 3 years after we started dating. We had a court wedding due to financial constraints. Dylan was sending Sherry a lot of money every month for emergencies. Even after we married, he continued this practice, straining our finances. I didn't stop him. I believed he had the right to help his mom. However, Sherry became a problem. She regularly spoke ill of me and gossiped with her friends, spreading rumors about me being a gold digger. I ignored it initially, but it started affecting my reputation. Despite Dylan's efforts, Sherry never treated me kindly. She believed I wasn't good enough for her son. Surprisingly, one day, Dylan told me that his mom wanted to invite me to a small party she was hosting. I was skeptical since she disliked me. Dylan assured me that she promised to improve and wanted me there. It seemed odd considering her recent financial struggles, but Dylan believed she managed somehow. I agreed to go, despite my concerns about her behavior. Dylan hoped his mom was making an effort, so I decided to keep an open mind. I truly wanted us to mend our relationship and become friends. I had serious doubts that Sherry would ever consider being friends with me, despite my willingness to be civil and make an effort for Dylan's sake. It seemed that Sherry had little regard for his happiness. Despite my skepticism, I decided to attend the party, eagerly waiting for Sherry to provide details. Sherry texted me the next day, and I assumed she was extending the invitation. However, her message took an unexpected turn. She started by mentioning the party at a 5-star hotel everyone had been raving about, promising her friends a great time. This excited her, and she planned to take 15 people. Curious, I asked if I was invited, given Dylan's assurance. To my surprise, Sherry responded with arrogance and disdain. She made it clear that I was not invited, emphasizing the exclusivity of the event due to her wealth, family status, and the supposed classiness of her friends. I was taken aback and confused, as Dylan had genuinely believed Sherry was extending an invitation. I expressed my assumption, only to be met with Sherry's condescending remarks, stating that I wouldn't understand the intricacies of planning such an event. I decided to maintain my dignity, acknowledging her message and clarifying that I wouldn't attend if I wasn't wanted. Sherry reiterated her stance, emphasizing her class and status, while I resisted the urge to respond with anger. Disappointed and hurt, I chose not to share this with Dylan. Instead, I patiently waited for the day of the party. Sherry, oblivious to the emotional impact of her actions, sent me a picture showcasing her and her friends in designer outfits, flaunting their status on social media. I refrained from responding, choosing to focus on my work and patiently await the unfolding of events. After about 3 hours, I received a call from my dad, and here's a confession for you all. My dad owns the hotel where Sherry was hosting her party. Sherry had no clue about this. 3 years ago, I inherited a substantial amount from my grandfather, which I invested in my dad's business. Now, I receive a share of the profits from the hotel and other family-owned businesses. Despite coming from a well-off family, I prefer not to broadcast it, and that's why Sherry was unaware of my background. She also had no idea about the high cost of the 5-star hotel and its restaurant. Sherry let her friends order without checking the menu or prices, resulting in a hefty $2,000 bill. This turn of events was the perfect opportunity for revenge. My dad called me to inform me that Sherry was at the hotel, having amassed a $2,000 bill. She was now asking for a 50% discount, claiming she was short on cash. My dad sought my advice, as Sherry's party had been rude and entitled, upsetting the staff. As expected, I shared my frustration with my dad, recounting how Sherry had boasted about the party to mock me for not being invited. The irony was not lost on me, given that she couldn't even afford the party she was flaunting. My dad expressed his understanding of the situation and shared the challenges faced by his staff due to Sherry's behavior. I saw an opportunity for revenge and suggested making Sherry and her team wash the dishes, clean the entire kitchen and the floor, given their insulting behavior. I wanted to extend this revenge to include Sherry's team, who had also mistreated our staff. If Sherry tried anything foolish, my dad could call the cops on her. My dad laughed at the suggestion, giving it a big thumbs up. He even offered to share pictures of the event. It seemed like the perfect chance to turn the tables and teach Sherry a lesson about humility and respect. When it happened, I would have relished seeing Sherry face the consequences of her actions. My dad promised to follow my suggestion and hung up. An hour or so later, he sent me pictures of Sherry and her friends washing dishes and wiping the floor at our restaurants. Dad also shared that when Sherry saw him as the restaurant owner, she looked relieved. She began telling him that she knew the owner and they would get out of the situation. To her surprise, Dad instructed her to clean his restaurants. She was dumbstruck for a while, and when she started to protest, Dad reminded her that since she didn't consider me family, he didn't consider her family either. It was a hilarious turn of events, and though I wished I was there, I did get some good pictures. After a while, Dylan came home looking visibly upset. I could tell he had heard from Sherry about what happened, and I knew she must have given him a twisted account of the events. He approached me, questioning what he heard about my dad making his mom clean the restaurant dishes. I explained to Dylan that it was the usual norm for us in such situations. Sherry had gone to our restaurant, racked up a $2,000 bill, claimed she didn't have more than $1,000, harassed our staff, and her party had been a nightmare. I believe this punishment was fitting. Dylan seemed surprised and questioned who Sherry had taken with her and what they ordered. I informed him that she took 15 people, and they ordered a lot, especially the fancy items. He expressed disbelief, as Sherry had told him she was taking only 4 people and had invited me, but I declined. I clarified that things didn't happen that way, and I showed him the text messages from Sherry. Dylan requested the bills and asked me to show him the texts, wanting to understand the situation better. I showed Dylan all the texts, and my dad sent him the bills. I also presented some pictures to illustrate the scale of Sherry's party. Dylan grew extremely mad when he saw everything. He called Sherry, asking her what was wrong and why she hadn't told him the full story. Sherry claimed she only mentioned being short of cash, and I must have given him a different story to sabotage her. Dylan confronted her, pointing out that she declined my invitation and insulted me by saying I wasn't classy enough for her. Sherry tried to brush it off as a harmless joke, but Dylan wasn't buying it. He questioned her spending thousands of dollars taken from him on friends while insulting his wife. He called her out for her actions, stating that spending $2,000 on food and drink wasn't a small matter. Sherry was left trying to justify her actions, while Dylan expressed his disbelief at her behavior. "I made a mistake by giving you money whenever you shared stories about needing it, Mom." "Well, guess what? I'm not giving you any money again. But Dylan, you've been so supportive for so long, you can't just stop now. It was a one-time mistake." "Dylan, why are you overreacting?" "No, Mom, I am not overreacting. This is not a one-time mistake. If you can't even consider my wife as family, I don't want anything to do with you. I always thought you would change your mind, but you never did. I'm not paying you to insult my wife and call her classless while she sacrifices a lot to support you. This ends now." Dylan didn't listen to Sherry anymore. He hung up on her and blocked her number. He also apologized profusely to me for being mad at me without knowing the full story. I forgave him because, well, he did stand up for me. We had a serious discussion about Sherry and jointly decided that she will no longer be in our lives for now. Yes, Dylan is now a wealthy man, but he knows to stay humble. He found Sherry's behavior completely unacceptable, especially because it was directed towards me. I agreed with the fact that it was very unfair to me, and I was all set to remove her from our life for good. In the next few days, Sherry reached peak madness. She realized that her own actions may have damaged her relationship with her son for good, sending her into a horrible panic. She showed up at our house and demanded to speak with Dylan. Slowly, her demands turned into begging after she was turned away from the door every time. Yes, Sherry worked and earned some money. However, it wasn't enough for the high-end lifestyle she had gotten used to all these years. Dylan had stopped giving her money entirely. Instead, he invested some of his funds into my dad's business to help him open new hotels and restaurants in the neighborhood. We do plan on expanding our hotel business to bigger cities, but we'll have to see what the future holds. Since Dylan stopped sending her funds, Sherry had to downgrade her lifestyle significantly. She was struggling to keep the rented condo with her own money and ultimately decided to end her lease. She has now shifted to a small one-bedroom apartment and doesn't have any money to spend on extras after all the bill payments. How do we know this? She emails us about it. Of course, she still downplays her behavior and acts like we are overreacting. Suffice it to say, she will be out of our lives for a while now. Just a month ago, I found out that I was pregnant. Dylan and I are overjoyed and busy planning everything before our baby comes. To be honest, I'm glad that my child won't be around shallow people like Sherry anymore. But if the time comes, I will make sure my dear mother-in-law doesn't get to fill my child's head with nonsense. For now, please wish us luck so that we can be good parents to a healthy child.
My name is Ava, and I am 34 years old. I live with my husband James, and we both work for the company founded by my father-in-law. Although he is now retired, my father-in-law single-handedly transformed a small construction firm into an enterprise generating $250 billion in annual revenue. He even acquired rival companies, and while his methods could be forceful, everyone admired his remarkable business acumen. James, chosen to follow in his father's footsteps, was raised in a pampered environment and possesses a gentle nature. However, I fear his gentleness isn't suited for the cutthroat world of business. While gentle may sound pleasant, in reality, he is incredibly indecisive. I've started to doubt his suitability as a husband, let alone a CEO. James himself has admitted, "I'm not cut out to be a CEO. I'll probably just be a figurehead if I become one. It's easier for me that way." His lack of serious intention to take over the company has left me frustrated after 5 years of marriage. In stark contrast to James, I consider myself quite decisive. During his active years, my father-in-law appreciated this quality in me and entrusted me with various tasks. Before marrying James, I worked at a bank where I managed finances and always kept numbers in mind. I planned to become a full-time homemaker after our wedding, but my father-in-law requested that I join the construction company instead. Soon after I started working there, he began inviting me to board meetings and seeking my opinions on management matters. Initially, the board members were skeptical about including the founder's daughter-in-law in such important discussions. However, as I consistently offered valuable insights, they began to listen to my suggestions. Despite James being a board member, he rarely attended meetings, and this was accepted as the norm by the board and my father-in-law. One day, after returning home from a meeting, I found James nonchalantly watching TV. "Why didn't you attend today's meeting?" I asked. Angrily, "You're a key member, you should take it seriously." Without showing any remorse, he retorted, "Even if I attend, I don't really understand the discussions. Besides, the board members prefer you, so there's no problem, right?" I wondered if he was irritated by my participation in the board meetings. Despite his remarks, my father-in-law had been teaching me the intricacies of running the business and seemed to be grooming me as his successor. I had started enjoying my involvement in management, and before I knew it, I was working hard to meet my father-in-law's expectations. About 2 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. Whenever there were major decisions to be made, the board members would consult me while James was sidelined. I had hoped that being in such a situation would spur James to work harder, but instead, he became even more disengaged from his work. Although he would come to the office in the morning, he would disappear somewhere by noon and stay home for the rest of the day. When he saw me at home, he wouldn't talk about work at all, seemingly indifferent to the company's affairs. Meanwhile, my workload at the company was increasing, and I was getting busier. After my father-in-law's retirement, the board members relied on me more and more, and I was tasked with duties akin to those of a CEO. Given that we were a large company with many employees, I was committed to increasing sales and profits for the sake of our workers. With the hard work of our employees, our sales began to grow. I found running the company more interesting and became more engrossed in my work. Conversely, my husband James seemed to be losing interest in his work, and his appearances at the company began to diminish. The conversations between us at home lessened, and our relationship became increasingly tense. Around that time, our lives took a different turn. James came home and casually mentioned, "I ran into your sister Megan today and we had lunch together." Megan, 2 years older than me, had just divorced about 6 months ago due to her infidelity. This led to a big commotion when her enraged husband stormed our parents' home. My husband James went to my parents' house to calm down Megan's husband in my place as I was busy with work. With his gentle upbringing and calming personality, James managed to convince Megan's furious husband to leave for the time being. Later, Megan told me, "Your husband is really something. He handled my raging husband so effortlessly." She praised James. Megan's husband, in his anger, must have been disarmed by James' calm and easygoing demeanor. Megan was able to divorce her husband after paying alimony, but since this incident, she seemed to look at James differently. Until then, she had thought of James, who was not particularly attractive and quite indecisive, as just a rich, pampered son. After the incident, she seemed to believe he was a respectable business owner. Now, single after her divorce, Megan probably saw James as a great catch, given her love for wealthy men. However, I, engrossed in work, couldn't imagine such a thing. Of course, my sister wouldn't have known that James is just a nominal executive who doesn't actually manage the company. Megan's ex-husband was an elite employee of a foreign company. At their wedding, she had bragged to me, "My husband is an excellent employee with a high salary, and on top of that, he's handsome. You're jealous, aren't you?" Her ex-husband was handsome, smart, and carried a stylish vibe. I couldn't understand why she would cheat on such a wonderful husband. 3 months after hearing from James that he had lunch with Megan, I returned home to find James unusually serious. "I have something to discuss," he said. It was the first time I had heard such words from him, and I had a bad premonition. With my heart pounding, I waited for him to speak. "Actually, Megan is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce." I was shocked by the request for a divorce, but even more surprised to hear that Megan was pregnant. At a loss for words, I listened as James continued. Megan is planning to come over on our next day off to discuss this, so I'm counting on you. Stunned, I asked, "So you want to marry my sister?" With a troubled look, James responded, "It's not that I want to marry her, but if she's having my baby, I guess I have no choice." I sighed at James' typical indecisiveness and replied, "Well, if she's carrying your baby, I suppose it can't be helped. Let's discuss this when she comes over." It seemed like my husband and I couldn't make any decisions together, so I decided to meet directly with my sister to figure things out. Even though I had already made up my mind to divorce, I thought I needed to consult my father-in-law about the company's situation. As the daughter-in-law of the founder, I was involved in running the business, but if I divorced, I would become a stranger. The next day, I went to my in-laws' house and told my father-in-law exactly what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, was thrilled at the news of her son having a child, but quickly quieted down when glared at by my father-in-law. She seemed more concerned about her grandchild than the company's management. After some thought, my father-in-law said with a smile, "Ava, I want you to continue to be involved in the company's management as you have been. I don't care about James. I'll take the responsibility, so let him do what he likes." It seemed that my father-in-law valued the management of the company more than his son or grandchild. Even though he had retired, he still had a strong voice in the company, and since he held most of the company's shares, no executives would go against his will. I was also interested in my work and reluctant to give it up now. With my job settled, it was time to discuss the future with my sister. On my day off, my sister came to my house with a big smile. "Ava, it's a pity you couldn't have a baby. I'll give you plenty of consolation money. Please leave this house immediately," she said with a triumphant air. My husband sat silently, listening to our conversation without saying anything, despite being the one who caused the problem. I was appalled at his indifferent face. "It's okay to get divorced," I said, "but there's also the issue of alimony and division of property. Let's bring in a lawyer and decide properly. I never thought you, my sister, would fall for a man like James." I retorted to my sister with irony. She glared at me with a stern face for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. I finally realized that it's not about looks in men, it's about what's inside. It was funny to hear my sister talk as if she fully understood my husband's inner self. Holding back my laughter, I replied, "That's great, isn't it? From now on, live happily with James." The inner self my sister was talking about was likely money. She seemed to be under the impression that my husband was the president of my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from him. When the discussion was over, my sister said she would start living here and brought a moving company. Though I only took out the necessary items, knowing my quick-tempered sister, I had already arranged for a new apartment. I also hired a lawyer and had documents prepared for the division of property and claims for alimony. The next day, after moving out my belongings, I started negotiations for alimony and division of property with my husband and sister, accompanied by my lawyer. My husband was still present that day, sitting with an indifferent face, and only my sister was speaking. "As I said before, I'm willing to pay as much alimony as you want, so please decide at your convenience." Hearing my sister's words, my lawyer decided to also claim alimony against my sister in addition to my husband. My sister was still paying alimony in installments to her ex-husband, so my lawyer had said in advance that it might be impossible to claim alimony from her. But since she said she would pay me as much as I wanted, I decided to make a claim. When it came to negotiations about the division of property, my sister excitedly said, "This mansion is originally James's family's, so it shouldn't be part of the division of property, right?" The lawyer answered my sister emotionlessly, "This building and the land belong to the company, so it's up to the company to decide." Even my husband seemed surprised by this. "Is that so? I thought this house was Dad's," he said casually. My sister, on the other hand, was taken aback and attacked the lawyer. "Wait a minute, so does that mean I can't live in this house?" The lawyer responded in a businesslike manner, "Since it's company property, you can continue to live here if the company allows it." At this comment, my sister seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "Oh, you should have said that earlier. It'll be fine since James, the president, will be living here." The lawyer looked surprised for a moment, then burst into laughter. "What are you talking about? Ava is the president, not James." Seeing my sister, who was planning to remarry my husband yet didn't even know that fact, made me laugh. My sister immediately turned to my husband and yelled, "Ha, James, you're not the president." I stepped in for my husband, who looked troubled, and explained to my sister, "James is merely an advisor without any executive rights. I'm an executive director, but I was also made president. Our father-in-law, the founder, had always been the president, but when he retired, he made me an executive director and president. The other executives appreciated my performance, so there was no opposition." On the other hand, my husband, thanks to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without executive rights, which is more of a pity than a mere employee. Even though it's called an executive salary, since he wasn't really doing any work, it was less than what an ordinary employee would get. So, I was bearing all the living expenses. James, who didn't care about our household finances, didn't even bother to know whether the house he was living in was company-owned or belonged to his father. Although our home was company-owned, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent. I thought of it as a normal rental property. The lawyer, still laughing, asked me, "Can we continue to rent this house to James?" My sister reacted to the rent part of the lawyer's question. "What do you mean by rent? Are you suggesting that I take rent from James? Isn't it the company's property? Just make it free." The lawyer presented the rent amount, laughing heartily at her words. She was shocked to see the figure, and so was James, who seemed to be hearing about it for the first time. "Guess a house this big does have a high rent," he muttered. "I can't afford that with my salary," James admitted, realizing his executive compensation would barely leave any money after paying the rent. Covering their living expenses would be hard. Over the 5 years of our marriage, James had used up all his modest executive compensation. My salary also disappeared in high rent and living expenses, leaving hardly any assets. Splitting the savings was the only option for asset division. After the lawyer left, my sister, now aware that the mansion she had hoped for was actually rented, seemed utterly deflated, staring blankly. James was grinning as usual. I suggested, "Why don't we vacate this place and go back to your parents' house? Your mother was so happy about the pregnancy news." James agreed, but I laughed at the thought of why I had to consider this man, who was about to be my ex, this much. I started worrying whether this unreliable man could raise a child, but I decided to leave it as it was none of my business. I asked my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, "Are you okay with the alimony payment, sis? You seem pretty confident, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right?" She was stunned to hear this, her face suddenly snapping back to reality. "Alimony? I have to pay it too." She was astonished, seemingly having heard nothing of the earlier discussion. "You said, 'I'll give plenty of alimony,' but you weren't expecting me to pay it, right? My salary is really low." James and my sister exchanged surprised glances. Though not a lawyer, watching these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already obtained signatures on the divorce papers and alimony request documents. Seeing James and my sister like this was pathetic. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, had returned to his parents' home, just as I had warned. But there seemed to be constant quarrels between my sister and my in-laws. The main cause of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, who was hoping for an heir, was extremely angry. My father-in-law, who had disliked my sister for stealing his son from me from the very beginning, hadn't even spoken to her. He fronted the alimony for James, and I was paid in full. But my sister, seeing this, pleaded with him, "Dad, could you please pay my alimony as well?" To this, the father-in-law responded, "I have no reason to be called Dad by you." He was fuming. Not being able to obtain anything she had hoped for, my sister ran away from my ex-husband's family home without a word and went missing. She had practically remarried the ex-husband just to bear the burden of alimony, which was utterly foolish. My ex-husband seemed to consider getting back with me, but his father scolded him. "You're the kind of man who should never even think about having a family. You can't even take care of yourself properly." I wouldn't get back with my ex-husband even if he begged me. I had stopped believing in him when he cheated on me with my sister and was disgusted by his indifferent attitude during our discussions. He was dismissed from his executive position and is now working as a temporary employee. I've continued being the CEO, which is the core of my life. I don't even think about remarrying someone after the breakup. I've kept in touch with my father-in-law, receiving advice when needed. For now, I want to focus on the company, thinking of it as being married to it for the sake of my employees.